Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon. It's not evening yet. I'm happy you joined us today. We are going to be doing session 10, and it's going to be in 2 Kings, chapter 12, verses 4 through 16. But before we go, and it's called, the stories today is God Honors. But before we go into that, I'd like to just flash back to last week when we were talking about Elisha and what he was telling the king's right-handed man about the food situation would be taken care of the next day, and he told the right-hand man that he would not live to see it. I guess because the right-handed man was skeptical about it. So the reason he didn't get to see or taste the food is because he was later killed before he could do that. So I just wanted to bring that up, and as you read through Kings, you'll see it. It's on down a chapter or two for that, okay? I just wanted to clear that up. I wish I'd brought it in last week. It would have clarified the lesson a little bit more. But let's go into this one here, and it's going to be, like I said, in 2 Kings chapter 12, verses 14 through 16. God honors. God honors people who demonstrate God's promises. Now think about that. There's an old saying that goes, many people don't plan to fail. They just fail to plan. And most of us are like that. I'm like that. I'm the type of guy that when I get in my head, I'm gone. And I don't make out a plan, and most of the time, they usually fail. And then there's others of us are busy doing many things, but we don't prioritize the most important projects. And there again, that's just like me. We become overwhelmed with the enormity of the task, and so we keep putting it off, hoping it will take care of itself. And if you ask my wife, she'll tell you I do that all the time. But eventually, we reveal our priorities and the task we complete. What we think important gets done. And I'm sure we're all kind of like that. Well, let's go on into understanding the context. And we're briefly just going to talk a little bit about Elijah and Elisha. They focused their ministries in the northern kingdom of Israel, and thus they were involved with those kings of Israel at that time. Now, we're going to move away from the northern kingdom of Israel to the southern kingdom of Judea and King Joash. So King Joash became king when his father married a Halai, and that's how Baal got brought back into Judea. Ahazi continued Baal worship in Judea, continued it. He ruled only 1 year before dying. When Ahazi died, his mother Athaliah pronounced a death sentence on all of David's male descendants. Now these were heirs to David's throne. She declared a death sentence on all of them. And indeed, all were killed except for one, a 1-year-old named Joash. Now, similar to the story of Moses, the young boy was hidden away for his own safety. See, Joash's aunt, who was married to a Hebrew priest named Jehoiada, hid Joash along with his nurses in the Jerusalem temple. Now, a woman who worshipped Baal would never probably ever even think of the Jewish temple as a hiding place. And they stayed there for 6 years until just before her disastrous reign was brought to an end. Now, in those formative years, Joash was taught by Jehoiada, the priest. So let's go on into exploring the text today, and we're going to see what the problem is here in verses 4 through 8. Then Joash said to the priest, all the dedicated silver brought to the Lord's temple, census silver from vows, and all silver voluntarily given for the Lord's temple. Each priest is to take it from his successor and repair whatever damage is found in the temple. Now let's stop right there and discuss those two verses. Now Joash saw that the temple needed to be repaired. And that temple was, I'd say, anywhere between 125 years to 150 years old. So it was kind of old. Now Joash took the scripture which says he took it to heart to renovate the Lord's temple. So Joash, and that was 2 Chronicles 24, verse 4. So at this point, the temple was, like I said, about 125 to 150 years old. And it was showing some wear and tear. After that long, most buildings do show a lot of wear and tear. So some of the leaders who preceded Joash had not taken care of the temple or its belongings. Now, as if that was not enough, the sons of Athaliah had stolen the sacred instruments from the Lord's temple and used them in the temple that honored Baal worship. Now that was in itself was disgrace, and it was a desecration to the temple. Joash instructed the priest to take all the dedicated silver that people brought to the temple to redirect the funds in order to repair whatever damage is found in the temple. Now these funds had previously gone to the priest for food and other personal needs. So he was saying, let's stop that, take that, and start repairing the temple. Now, it talked about the dedicated silver up there. Now that came from three sources. The first was a consensus silver. Now this was a half shekel that each man age 21 and above was to bring annually to the temple. Now, although this was originally a one-time contribution, it had developed into an annual tax after Solomon completed the Jerusalem temple. Second was silver from vows that people had promised to give the Lord. These were special offerings that expressed a person's thankfulness to God. Now, the third type was silver voluntary given for the Lord's temple. Now, the tradition behind this gift was the free will offering described in Leviticus chapter 22, verse 17 through 25. This offering, which began as an animal presented for sacrifice in the tabernacle, had transitioned to being an offering of silver by the time Solomon's temple was finished. Joash instructed the priest to receive the dedicated silver for his successor for the temple restoration work. That's what he wanted them to do with that. And now this work started around 812 BC, so you can see about the timeline here, all this was going on. Now let's look at verses 6 through 8 now. But by the 23rd year of the reign of King Joash, the priests had not repaired the damage to the temple. So King Joash called the priest, Jehoiada, and the other priests and asked, "Why haven't you repaired the temple's damage? Since you don't take any silver from the assessors. Instead, hand it over for the repair of the temple." So the priests agreed that they would receive no silver from the people and would not be the ones to repair the temple damage. So it seemed like to me that this whole time the priest, even though King Joash had said use the temple, the silver for the temple to repair it, the priest hadn't done this. They kept on keeping it for themselves. So he called the chief priest in and said, "No more of this. Take this money and start repairing the temple." So let's look at that a little closer. And as I said, that Joash's plan was a good one, but there was a problem to it. The priest had not followed through with their assignment. Despite being told to gather the collections quickly, the Levites did not hurry. And as a result, they had not repaired the damaged temple. Joash gathered all the priests together and confronted them about not fulfilling their assignment. Now, Joash's aunt, Jehosheba, who had hidden the young Joash in the temple to spare him from his murderous grandmother, had told Joash things about the temple along with her husband. Now, confronting a man who was so important in his life and also elderly at this point shows how dedicated Joash was to making sure the temple was repaired. The chief priest was Joash's uncle. So we can see that him being confronting the chief priest, he was pretty dedicated on getting this temple fixed. as well as he should have been. He was doing the right thing. So the king and the priest came to an agreement. They agreed that they had no more money. The priest would no longer be responsible for gathering the funds or for making sure the temple was repaired. That was the agreement they reached. So a new solution here is needed. So let's look at the solution and what takes place next. In verses 9 through 12. It says, Then the priest Jehoiada took a chest, bored a hole in its lid, and set it beside the altar on the right side as one enters the Lord's temple. The priest who guarded the threshold put into the chest all the silver that was brought to the Lord's temple. Whenever they saw there was a large amount of silver in the chest, the king's secretary and the high priest would go bag it up and tally the silver found in the Lord's temple. Then they would give the weighted silver to those doing the work, those who oversaw the Lord's temple. They in turn would pay it out to those working on the Lord's temple, the carpenters, the builders, the masons, the stone cutters, and would use it to buy timber and quarried stone to repair the damage to the Lord's temple, and for all expenses for temple repairs. See, Joash was working with the high priest, and they developed a new plan. His intent was to restore both the temple and the proper worship of God to its rightful place in the lives of his people. So we can see it. We get right here that King Joash was a good king. He was a worshiper of God. Now, the king's heavy involvement in the temple life was uncommon. Usually the high priest did all this. So the last time that the temple was mentioned occurred 5 kings back when King Asa raided temple treasury of its gold and silver in order to pay a bribe to Ben-Hadad, king of Aram. So there's 2 words that we can use to describe Joash's new plan. The first is accountability. He had accountability for where the money was going and how it was being used. He had several priests who were collecting silver. And see, Joash commanded that a chest be put there to collect the silver in. And it was a single wooden box. And it was to be built to hold the silver. Now, the chief priest bored a hole in the lid of the chest, and it was placed at the north gate at the temple's inner court. So it went directly from the people to the temple. The priest who guarded the threshold referred to 3 priests who were responsible for making sure no one unclean entered the temple. So when the chest was full of silver, 2 people were responsible for counting it and likely for weighing it. The king's secretary and the high priest were the 2 people. Both men were held in high regard to maintaining those roles. So we can see that there's a tremendous amount of accountability there. Now the king's secretary and the high priest will give the silver to the project overseers, and they in turn would pay the bills for the stone, the lumber, the workers, all this they would take care of. It was accountability, financial accountability. Now the second word used to describe Joash's new plan is abundance. The people gave generously. Now the book of 2 Chronicles offers details beyond what we read in 2 Kings about what went on here. When Joash's new plan was announced, all the leaders and all the people rejoiced. They brought the tax and put it in the chest until it was full. So the people gave generously. They were willing to do it. And you know, that's what happens. People gives generously to God's work. And this is what they were doing. And this verse shows that the people gave both joyfully and generously. The same way God wants us to give to his work. The same way. We should be doing the same thing. Now, we don't want to be tempted to think the Old Testament principles about giving no longer apply. We should remind ourselves that the New Testament teaches God loves a cheerful giver. Our attitude in giving reflects what is in our hearts. Think about that. Because the people gave in abundance, The chest had to be emptied daily. The people's generosity was an indication of two things. First, the temple, its upkeep, and thus the proper worship of God had become high priorities for the Israelites. And second, Joash's solution had worked. So now let's get to the action of what's going on here. And we're going to read verses 13 through 16 here. However, no silver bowls, wick trimmers, sprinkling basins, trumpets, or any articles of gold or silver were made for the Lord's temple from the contributions brought to the Lord's temple. Instead, it was given to those doing the work, and they repaired the Lord's temple with it. No accounting was required from the men who received the silver to pay for doing the work, since they worked with integrity. The silver from the guilt offering and sin offering was not brought to the Lord's temple, since it belonged to the priest. So we see that the priests were not left out here. They still got their share of the silver. But there's also the box that the silver was put in, that was the people brought in, was more than full. It was emptied probably twice, maybe 3 times a day. We don't know. They gave generously to it. And that was used to repair the restoration work to the temple. Now, none was directed for use in making the instruments that we mentioned in the verses above, and none was given to the priest. See, verse 13 kind of lists some of the objects the priests used in worship, but there was none made from the money that was given for the restoration of the temple. So, why would the writer in here specifically say that none of the worship emblems came from the contributions brought to the Lord's temple? Because it had been set aside for the work in the Lord's temple, not for use of anything else, and that's the reason it was specified here. We can see that the description highlights integrity in the way the temple personnel used the offering being brought in. The silver was being used for the purpose for which it was given. The silver was given to do the work of the Lord's temple. It paid for the carpenters, the builders, the masons, the stone cutters. It paid for all that. Paid for the lumber, paid for the stone, paid for everything. And after all the repairs and restoration work on the temple was completed and all the people had been paid, the leftover funds were directed toward the articles used to worship. So there's money left over. God supplied the need. He gave the money to fill that need, and it was an abundance. God blessed the money that the Israelites gave to do the temple work, to where there's money left over for the estimates also. And we see that having the silver left over again highlights the people's generosity in giving and God's blessings. In verse 15 and 16, it says, neither the king's scribe nor the high priest called for an accounting from those who received the silver. The men involved in this process had such integrity that their word and work was beyond any accusations that could be made against them. There was none. So these men were held in high esteem. So one might think that by bypassing the priest in the process would have hurt them financially. They did not suffer. They can continue to have sufficient income, which they delivered from the sacrificial offerings that people brought in. So nobody was hurt, and the temple was restored. Joash's new system offered 2 advantages to the earlier one. First, it streamlined the process. And second, there was accountability at every step. These 2 advantages would have enabled outsiders to see the integrity of those involved in leading and doing the restoration work. Now, I'm going to tell you what this story is all about right here. And listen to me now. This story is a reminder that handling our money and financial obligations with biblical integrity bears witness of our Christian faith. The Lord is honored as we honor Him with our resources. In turn, God honors that type of integrity. So that's the whole point of the story, integrity. God honors it. People give generously. It bears witness to our Christian faith. And God honors that. You know, let's look at a few things that apply to the text today. Leaders are accountable for their actions, and they should be held accountable for their actions. God expects His people to take care of their financial obligations. He expects us to pay our bills. He expects us to give to our church, to help pay for the financial responsibilities the church has also. And a believer's integrity in business can further the case of God's kingdom. You know, you may not think people watch us in our dealings every day, but somebody's always watching us. And those who know we're Christian, we stand on, people are watching us all the time, hoping to catch us messing up so they can say it. We can see in the case of the rebuilding of the temple that you plan of King Joash worked. There was accountability and there was integrity. And that's what God asked of us, our accountability and our integrity in our financial dealings. I hope you enjoyed the lesson today, and I hope to see you soon when we all can get back into church on a regular basis. I know some of us still can't quite make it yet, but we know that you're out there and you're watching Brother Tony's sermons on Sunday and his lessons on Wednesday, and we hope it's a blessing to you. God bless you all until we see each other again.